Warramai and welcome to the Training and Support Unit's Jumbana podcast series, where we explore the stories, insights, and culture that shape our working world. I'm your host, Jamie Carpenter. I'm a Darug woman living and working on beautiful Yuin country. I would like to start by acknowledging the rich cultural heritage and ongoing connections of Aboriginal people to the lands and waters across New South Wales. I recognise their continuous connection to country, culture, and community, and honour the history and traditions that have been woven into the fabric of this land for thousands of generations. Today, I'm yarning with Steve Eller. Steve is the District Director of Aboriginal Health on the New South Wales Central Coast. He is a proud Aboriginal man from the Yuin Nation and grew up in the Aboriginal community of La Perouse in Sydney. Steve has over 28 years' experience in the Aboriginal drug and alcohol and Aboriginal health spaces. He was inducted into the National Indigenous Drug and Alcohol Honour Roll in 2012 and was awarded the First Peoples Award at the Australasian Professional Society on Alcohol and Other Drugs in 2013. Steve is a member of the New South Wales Ministry of Health Aboriginal Directors and Managers Strategic Leadership Group. He holds a Masters of Philosophy and a graduate diploma in Indigenous Health Promotion from the University of Sydney. Thanks for joining me today, Steve. Why don't we start by telling me a little bit about yourself? How did you get to be the Director of Aboriginal Health at Central Coast?
Jamie, that's probably a long story. I had a sporting background, but when I was playing sport, I was a landscape gardener, and I come to Gosford.
Right, okay.
I come to Gosford and moved to Central Coast in the 91, beginning of 92, and I applied for a job at the hospital as a landscape gardener for the hospital because they just built Wyong Hospital, and it was a good opportunity to start at Wyong Hospital, at Gosford Hospital, which encompasses Wyong Hospital as well, because Central Coast Local Health District encompasses 4 hospitals, and Wyong and Gosford are one of them. So I was based at Gosford, but we got the job to landscape Wyong Hospital. So I was employed as a gardener in the hospital for a while, and I was in that role for about 8 years, 7 or 8 years, and there was a job come up in the Aboriginal Health Service with a lady called Vicky Bradford. She's now Vicky Holiday, and so Vicky asked me, did I want to take over the role of a Aboriginal drug and alcohol worker? So I wanted to get out of landscaping and do something different. So I took on that role, and I stayed in the drug and alcohol space for more than 20 years, and then got into, and part of that role in drug and alcohol, I ended up managing their counselling service and cannabis clinic service and merit service. Then the position for director or manager of Aboriginal Health come up in 2015. So I got that, and through processes and discussions and negotiations through the ministry, we ended up getting my position elevated to director's role. So I've been director here for the last 15, 16 months. So yeah, it just gives us a seat at the table, which is really good.
That is, and it's such an awesome story that you've gone from a sporting career to landscaping to now the director of Aboriginal Health in your area. That's just awesome. That is so cool. So I guess part of that is that you would have, obviously had lots of work now around Aboriginal families and communities and kids in part of your roles, probably the whole way through, I'm guessing.
Well, I suppose my role in the drug and alcohol space, I was an Aboriginal drug and alcohol worker. So 20 years in that space, working with community. And what was a good thing about that is, when you're working with Aboriginal communities, confidentiality is a major component of the work that we do. And for all the time I worked in the drug and alcohol space, no one knew who I was seeing. And the only people who knew who I was seeing were the patients I was seeing. So that confidentiality allows you to build trust in the community, and that trust you have in community builds up your capability. And I suppose people recognise you for not just the work you do, but you're someone who they can come and talk to.
Yeah, for sure. What other things do you think that people can do to build trust and rapport in Aboriginal communities?
I suppose the thing which I did was, how I approach anybody who I was working with would be, I'd just be honest with them. I always tell them a bit about me. Because I suppose from a professional perspective, most non-Aboriginal clinicians don't share information about themselves. And if we do that as blackfellas, it's not going to work. So I've always had that, I suppose, ability to be able to sit with somebody, no matter what level of life they're in, and what struggles they're going through, and actually share my story. Because I grew up in two worlds, in an Aboriginal world and a non-Aboriginal world. Because during the weekends I spent all my time at La Perouse, and on during the week I spent my time at Cabramatta, where Mum and Dad moved us to. So sort of grew up in two worlds. So you get to understand differences. And one thing I know about living with and working with Aboriginal people is that we like to share who we are, where we're from, but also a bit about, because I grew up in an Aboriginal community in La Perouse, and yeah, alcohol was a major issue back in the early days. So, and it's around that people know that you've lived the struggles, you've seen the struggles, and that working with them is a privilege. It's not a task. It's a privilege, because you understand where they're coming from. And the fact that I was a sportsman as well also sort of opened some doors. But I sort of showed them that no matter who I am or what I've done previously, their issues and their time with me is more important than anything else.
Let's talk a little bit about community consultation. How important do you think it is, or what kind of role does consultation play when you're trying to understand the implications of culture when working with families?
Um, consultation's always been important. I suppose it's the way the consultation's done and who you're consulting with about what, in a lot of contexts. Because I think sometimes if it's really good to get a community view on something that you're working on, or you need advice on, or that you want to make decisions on. I've always advocated that we need to have that community input. But sometimes it's really hard to have that community input if you're talking to someone who actually don't understand what you're trying to do or how to do it. That's where I find sometimes the consultation can be a little bit awkward. So I think sometimes you need to find the right people in the community to have that consultation with, and sometimes you might just have to spend more time explaining and giving a context to what you're trying to consult on. So I think consultation is really important. I think we need to consider that in everything that we do. The one thing that frustrates me is that here at the hospital system, we have over 140 Aboriginal staff. And there's probably 44, 45 in identified positions. A lot of times when we consult with them, that's not considered as community consultation, which frustrates me, because all these people live in our community. So we have a ready resource available to provide consultation. And I use that when I consult, because I give all our workers an opportunity to have a say. They're part of our community. They have Aboriginal families in our community, so they should be used as a resource as well. So, but like I say, it depends on what you want to consult on. But overall, community consultations are really important, and we should never discount that.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm thinking about our AMOS and BSF services and how they, we have some non-Indigenous staff working alongside Aboriginal health workers and practitioners to kind of provide this great stuff. And it's being aware that, yeah, our Aboriginal health staff are actually part of the community as well. They are part of that connection. So, they understand what's going. So I guess it just reiterates to me the importance of working with working alongside our Aboriginal health staff to make sure that we're doing the right thing for our community.
One of the good things that we have when we have non-Aboriginal staff working in our AMOS and BSF teams, because we have some really wonderful staff here on the Central Coast, non-Aboriginal staff working in the Aboriginal health services, and it's their willingness to listen, their willingness to gain knowledge and be educated around what's right, what's not right, what they can do, what they can't do, and respect that. And that's one of the things I really, I suppose, give a lot of our non-Aboriginal staff credit for, is that they're learning how to respect and understand the issues that come up for Aboriginal people, and that our Aboriginal staff need to have a say. Aboriginal staff need to be involved in the process, which I've found very rewarding for non-Aboriginal staff to be able to not only engage our Aboriginal workers, but other Aboriginal staff in other services when they need to refer a family onto something else. It's around having that respect on how to do that.
Yes, which kind of brings us to that whole idea about being culturally inclusive and also culturally sensitive, I think, and being respectful for our families as well. So how can professionals working in these fields and working with Aboriginal families ensure that they're being culturally sensitive to our families?
I mean, first and foremost, I mean, I know in the health system we have our respect the difference training, and we've got the online and face to face. So first and foremost, they need to do that. They need to get a bit of a background and a bit of a, I suppose, snapshot of what it's like to have some education on how to work and how to support and how to engage Aboriginal people and Aboriginal families, but understand the issues our families have faced over the years and the government policies that have actually influenced and, I suppose, put our families in a situation where they're in dire straits or whether they're struggling or whatever situation they're in. But they need to have a bit of understanding of how we as Aboriginal people think, and that, I mean, past government policies have really affected Aboriginal people, as we know, and that's been very well documented. But it's when they come into the hospital system, whether it's through the Aboriginal Mothers and Baby Service, whether it's through ED or wherever they come into the system, um, that trust is not there. So we need to look at how do we assist in building that trust. Um, I mean, I know people say we need to move on from the government policies, but they've affected our families systematically for years and years and years, and we need to have our workers understand that. So allow a bit of flexibility for when they come in, allow for a bit of, I suppose, allow for the personal patient or client or whoever it is to be cautious, because that's normal. But if you have a bit of an understanding of the issues Aboriginal people have faced over the years, that would be a normal process when you deal with them. And that's what we want our workers to when that Aboriginal person comes in, whether they're pregnant or whether it's to go and to see someone for the child or whatever it is, understand the issues that our families have faced. But people always say, oh, how do I treat them? Treat them like a normal person. Treat them with respect. Treat them how you treat your mother. Because our patients just want to be, they just want a good service, and get a good outcome for the patient that comes in. They don't want to be treated any different, but we want the workers to have the understanding of the issues they're facing, so there's a bit of flexibility and a bit of understanding for when the patient comes in.
Absolutely. And speaking to some other people, they had mentioned that, when people come into our services, we might have an understanding of what we believe are the issues that they need support in, but we need to listen to them. We need to give them a voice to say, what is it that you would like from us? What is it that we can do? How can we walk alongside you to get to wherever you want to be?
Perfect way of saying it, Jamie, because that's one of the things that we, I suppose, advocate to all our workers, is that we might have preconceived ideas, but it's not our decision. It's not our journey. It's the patient's journey. So we need to support them.
Absolutely, and I really like that you brought up that historical context stuff because it's very, very relevant that, I guess that some mainstream services may think that historically and what's happened in the past doesn't actually affect people today, but it does. There is a very significant historical context to a lot of the way that we see and view the world now as Aboriginal people because there has been that disheartened way of being treated previously in the past.
Jamie, put in the context, all our families have been affected by it. And we've lived it. As Aboriginal people, we live it every day. But having, say, non-Aboriginal people tell us, I need to get over it. I mean, it's, I struggle with that because they don't understand the context of, I suppose, what's happening in regards to the government policies and how Aboriginal people have been how Aboriginal people have been treated. Our stolen generation gives us, I suppose, a context of where we're still trying to work with survivors. We're listening to survivor stories. When we talk about truth telling is about understanding the issues that our communities right across Australia, not just in the Central Coast or down the South Coast, but right across Australia, where Aboriginal communities faced issues that come from all those government interventions, which have not only decimated our communities, they separated families, and all those things that we know that we try and work through that we have to deal with. Yeah, if when people say just get over it, well, it's not that simple.
Yeah, definitely not. And I guess it's acknowledging that, yes, this is a process, but we need to work together to get through this.
Yep. But the thing when patients come in, they don't. A lot of times they don't come in saying any of that sort of stuff. But we just need to know that they're the issues that are in the background that we need to consider, and that's what we want our workers to understand, is that we want you to consider that when you're working with our patients. You don't have to talk about it, you don't have to raise it, you don't have to even touch on it, but consider that as issues that our communities are facing. So just be little bit lenient and more understanding when you're working with our families.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think are some of the challenges that professionals might face when they're working with Aboriginal families?
I think sometimes they're scared because they think they might offend. I think that's probably one of the main ones I've seen is when they do the cultural awareness training, whether it's face to face online, they come out of that and they want to look at, okay, what can I do to make a difference? And a lot of times they actually don't do anything because they're too scared to offend. Um, so I mean, one of the things that we've always said is, if you're not sure, ask. If you're not sure, just like blackfellas are going to be very truthful anyway when they go in and see a clinician or a doctor or whatever it is. But don't be afraid. Don't do nothing because you're afraid you're going to offend. Just, if you're not sure, ask. So we're very clear on uh, advocating for our patients to have a voice, and also advocating for clinicians to don't be scared to ask questions or ask anything that's going to help you in getting a better outcome for that patient. Don't be scared because you think you're going to offend. Because if you think you're going to offend, but you're not acting, you're actually offending. So just be yourself and just act in a professional manner and just ask.
Yeah. And I guess it's all about that, acting, you're asking, but you're asking in curiosity and because you genuinely want to know. It's not about, yeah. So I think that that's really important to think about the way that you ask. Absolutely, you need to ask the questions, but just think about the way that you ask them. Because it's about being curious and it's about learning about the client, the patient, and getting some idea about how you can work with them and you can use those details. Yeah, that's really cool. What other challenges do you think that some people might have working, with Aboriginal families?
I suppose some other issues. I mean, one of the things that we've always looked at here is when any of our Aboriginal families come into a service, we've always advocated that they should ask whether they want an Aboriginal support person in with them. A lot of families say no, I'm okay, which is great. But some families say, yeah, I want an Aboriginal support person. So just give them the option. Don't always assume that because of an Aboriginal family, I need an Aboriginal worker. Because there's always the assumption that, well, we need to provide an Aboriginal service to an Aboriginal patient, or an Aboriginal patient comes into service, they belong to the Aboriginal Health Service, which is not actually true. But you ask an Aboriginal person when they come into the hospital system, no matter what part of the system they're in, if they want an Aboriginal support person or um, some sort of support, give them that option. That's one of the things, one of the mistakes a lot of our clinicians do make, which we do have conversations about. Don't assume. You need to ask whether they want, because we have a lot of families come over here who don't need our support, and that's okay. And we advocate for those families to go through the system in a way that most other people go through the system. And if they want our support, we're there if needed. But yeah, don't always assume that every Aboriginal person needs an Aboriginal support person.
Yeah, yeah. But I love that we still ask the question, no matter what. We give the people the opportunity to
100%.
make the
Yeah.
choice for themselves. Yeah, I really love that. That's really cool.
Well, that's the thing, Jamie. It's their journey, and they need to
Yeah,
have a say
yeah.
in how the journey goes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I guess as clinicians, we have this unique opportunity to have the chance to walk beside someone through that journey, which is a really big thing. Like it's a blessing to actually get that opportunity to do that and to be a part of that person's journey. So learning from them and how they like things to be is really special and unique.
I think sometimes when you walk with someone through their journey and show them how the process works, you may only need to do it once. But a lot of times they come back and you walk with them again, and that's perfectly fine because that's what we do. But sometimes someone just needs to be shown and actually understand it's not that hard. So you actually introduce them to the health system in a different way. and starting to build that trust with the health system. And once you do that, and they find that, they'll in the end, I can do this by myself. So next time they come in, and you're talking to them, they want me coming up with you and walk with you. And a lot of times our patients are saying, "No, I'm okay." Great. So you're building up their capacity to make their own decisions and walk their own path on their own. So that's part of our role anyway. It's just building the capacity of our community to be able to engage in the health system, and actually walk the walk they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that kind of brings me back to that whole, Aboriginal knowledge stuff and how we get that knowledge. Like, what are the benefits of incorporating Aboriginal cultural knowledge into our professional practice?
I suppose there's a couple of things that the first thing is that our cultural knowledge comes from a whole range of different aspects. So we've got different workers have different cultural knowledge. They come from different, like all our workers come from all different parts of Australia, which is interesting because you learn more about other cultures, other Aboriginal cultures, listen to people who come from other areas, but you're also learning that there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences. And that's the role of the Aboriginal health worker, is to try, how do we understand all the differences of all the patients we need to see? There might be some patients that you go and see who actually come from where you come from. So you know that the cultural issues that need to be considered, but we get a lot of people from out of area or out of state. So how do we get to understand their cultural issues? So that's where that conversation and asking the questions where Aboriginal staff will go and have that conversation is, what is it that we need to consider for you? What's going on for you that we need to understand from a cultural context? So that's one of the things that our workers are really good at, is asking that question in regards to what is it that we need to know that we don't know, and how can we help you, I suppose, in a better way, or what things do we need to consider when we're talking to the staff about your needs and what they need, whatever it is. So whatever the cultural context is, we need to understand that, no matter where they come from what area around the state or around Australia.
From an organisational perspective, how do you think that organisations can provide better support and training for their staff about cultural responsiveness or cultural competence?
I suppose the thing around the cultural awareness training, I know they've got the online and face to face. I think that's only one aspect of it. I think there needs to be a multi-pronged approach. I think doing that training and think you're culturally competent is, I think, something a little bit far fetched. I think that's the start of a journey, that we want people to think of it that way. Don't think of it as just be on end, or it's the start of a journey. One of the things that we're doing here on the coast is we're doing, with a lot of our services now, we're doing cultural immersions. So we're actually taking services, could be anywhere from 15 to 30 people out, depending on how big the service is, out on country, out to sites, and actually going out with elders and having conversations around the significance of the sites, how Aboriginal people lived in the early days, and the issues they face, and bring that back to the context of when Aboriginal people access the hospital system today. So taking them out on countries on the coast has had a massive effect in regards to opening people's eyes. So the cultural awareness is one, and face-to-face and online is one aspect of it. Doing the cultural immersions with elders is, I suppose, the next phase that we're looking at. And what I do after every cultural immersion we have with the service, I actually sit down with them and actually have a conversation with them, or debrief, because a lot of times that cultural immersion starts to, because there's some home truths and some truth telling in that. Sometimes it actually, I suppose, brings up other things for a lot of people. So having a debrief session after that, or a week after that, and actually saying, how was it you when you went home and spoke to your family? Tell me about how you felt going through the cultural immersion and hearing the stories that we as Aboriginal people have faced for hundreds of years. And just having that conversation, and let the I suppose the workers have that opportunity to unload or talk about what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and actually have really honest conversation about that. So that's probably the next stage that we've been doing. So the thing for me is around the cultural awareness training and doing those cultural immersions is, how do we, I suppose, evaluate whether it's actually made a difference with workers on the ground. So that's probably the stage where I know the ministry is looking at, and I'll be interested to know how we do that. So at the moment, I don't know.
But I love the idea that, that doing any kind of cultural awareness or cultural responsiveness training is just the start of the journey. It never ends. We always learn. Even us as Aboriginal people continue to learn things about our culture. On a daily basis, we learn things. So you can't expect to kind of do a couple of training programs and then go, yes, I'm responsive. I'm responsive. I know it doesn't work that way.
I'm always wary when I run into a clinician and they say, "Oh, I grew up in Northern Territory and a couple of my friends were Aboriginal." Okay,
Yeah.
so that makes you like know all about Aboriginal culture. Like, I that's the part I struggle with is like because I think they know it. Um, and instead of talking about it, and you're right, it's a journey. It's not about knowing and not knowing. It's a lifelong journey. And I don't put them in their place because I work for a health system. I've got to be professional, but sometimes I
Yes, you
struggle with
do.
that. Sometimes I struggle with that.
Yeah. How do you think that professionals or professional clinicians can balance their own cultural perspectives with those of the families that they work with? Because quite often, our cultures are all different and we all work in different ways. So how do we then balance that so that we're not, that we're working in an open and honest way with our families?
First and foremost, as an Aboriginal worker going in the families, it's about being honest in who you are and where you're from, and learning more about the family that you're working with. I think one of the things I advocate to our staff is that you need to know where the family where they're from and what are the connections that you may know of. So you may know people from the area they come from. So you got to have that connection and you got to build that rapport with them before you can actually do any work with them. So we have sort of really support our staff to get to know the people that they're working with. Like I said, not a lot of non-Aboriginal clinicians really struggle in sharing. Um, and they really struggle when we have that conversation with them around why we share, why it's important. Um, but I've always found that if I don't share, I can't build trust with them. And I always had this philosophy in my head that if we share, we're being honest, it actually allows us to be on an equal footing. So if I don't share and I want to hide secrets from them about who I am, where I'm from, how can they trust me? So they're the sort of things that I think about when I work for somebody.
Yeah. And I guess when we talk about sharing, we're not talking about blurring all boundaries and spurting your entire life to a person. It's just about sharing those little things, those little intricacies about, where you're from or, who you're connected to or what your background is that can kind of build that working alliance, I guess, that therapeutic relationship with a client or with a family.
Well, that build that connection is really important about who you are and where you're from and what your connections are. But it's also ask them where they're from. Do they understand where they're from? What are some of their connections that we may know of? So it's just trying to build that connection between the two, which and sometimes could take a long time. But it's an important process and it's never a rush. Um, and one of the other things that I've always done with clients is I've always asked them when we were sitting in the room, do you want to go outside? Or do you want what's going to make you comfortable? And I mean, I've taken clients and sat on the beach. I've taken clients and went up in the bush and sat in the bush. Just I want to make them feel comfortable and give them that time to talk about what they need to talk about, and give them that time to, I suppose, to reflect on what help do they need and what help can I provide them. And that's one of the other things we need to be very clear on, Jamie, is around being honest with what we can provide. So if we're not honest about what we can provide, there's a lot of expectations that'll come onto us as workers, and then the patient will be disappointed when you can't deliver. So if you can't provide something and a patient wants you to do something specific for them, well, I can't do that, but let's try and find someone who can, and I'll help you do that. So it's just around those sort of little things that we need to be very clear on. Boundaries are really important, but I know the wife holders have their boundaries where they don't talk about themselves, or whatever. But we need to talk about who we are, where we're from, about our connections, a bit about our life growing up in Aboriginal communities, and issues that we face in Aboriginal communities, but not being specific to your own family. But you need to build that that story base to actually build that connection.
Yeah. And I guess for us as Aboriginal people, it is about the story. It's about yarning. That's how we connect with people. Okay, last question I'm going to give you for today. What advice do you think that you could give new professionals working with Aboriginal families and children?
Probably only advice that I give anybody is just you got to be yourself. But if you don't know much about I suppose there's a couple of things in that. You might have Aboriginal workers who are new to their Aboriginality, and we know that happens. So they need to go on a journey and find out more about who they are, where they're from, and their connections, because they need to be able to share that with their patients. So if they're new workers, understand their role and responsibilities from a cultural perspective. I mean, they might understand their role and responsibilities from a professional perspective, but they really need to understand their role and responsibility from a cultural perspective. So they need to get to know more about their own journey and their own story, and they need to understand, they need to share that with their patients. Some patients might want that, that's fine. And there might be times where you don't do that, and that's fine too, but not every case is the same. But you still need to have the tools in the tool belt to be able to understand your cultural responsibilities of working with Aboriginal families. Because if you're working with a mother, she's pregnant, and the partner comes in and he wants to have a yarn about who you are, where you're from, and you're saying, oh, I'm not all sure, you're not going to have that trust. So he's going to say, oh, you're Johnny come lately. So as blackfellas do. So learn more about who you are and where you're from, so you can have that cultural conversation with them and actually start to build that connection. And once you do that, a lot of barriers get broken down because you're actually having that conversation with them. And it's not about being clinical. It's not about talking about anything. And you might end up talking, like, you might have that initial cultural conversation, but the conversation might turn into footy or might turn into something else. But you're having that conversation from that cultural context. Whereas if someone comes in and starts asking you questions and you've got no idea how to answer that, and you're in an Aboriginal role, you're actually going to lose the trust. Not all the time, but in most cases you'll lose the trust.
Yeah. And I think that goes for our non-Aboriginal staff as well. There needs to be that element of sharing. And, everybody should know their background. Everybody should know a little bit about their history and where they come from. And, you don't have to, it's not specifically just for Aboriginal people to kind of share that information. It's really important for non-Aboriginal staff to be able to share a little bit about their background and where they come from, because there's so many connections.
Good example of that is I've a non-Aboriginal nurse in my service, in my chronic care team, and she's awesome. From a nursing perspective, she's like second to none. And when she introduced herself, when we were in an Aboriginal forum, she goes, "Hi, I'm Susan. I'm a non-Aboriginal nurse, non-Aboriginal person. I'm a nurse." And then she talks about who she is and where she's from. So she actually acknowledges I'm not an Aboriginal person, but she starts telling a bit about herself as well, and that actually breaks down. So she actually went out and done placements in EDs out at Burke and Bundjalung. She asked me, so I allowed her to go out and do some placements in those communities. So the conversation I had with her, if someone asked me, "Oh, just this is how you would tell them." So that's how she responds to people now. And actually, it's getting that, building that trust when she's working with Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people. So,
What would be if we had to have one key message to go out to people from today's discussion? What do you think would be that key message for people?
I think one of the things that I always look at is trust your own ability. Be proud of who you are as Aboriginal people, and the rest will come from behind that.
Thank you so much for having a yarn with me today, Steve. It's been really great. I've learnt some great stuff from you, as I always do.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Jamie. It's always good fun to have a yarn.
I'd like to thank you for tuning in today to the Training Support Unit's Jumbana podcast. I hope the information we shared today helps to support you on your journey working with Aboriginal families and communities. Until next time, Yanu.